And the reason why I've had such an incredible, enlightening trip here in South Africa, because I came thinking maybe perhaps there's something I could bring, and teach the community here. But as it happens, I'm leaving with the opposite conclusion. I think that the American Jewish community has a lot to learn from the South African Jewish community, the South African Afrikaans community, and also the Black Christian Zionist community here with the history of mobilization and impact litigation. We need you guys more than you need us. Or you have to think long and hard, what is the balance between hate speech and free speech? Or we tolerate hate education? Where do we stand when right now, although we have a history of the blacks, the majority being oppressed, now you have a white minority being oppressed. And of course, the Jews are caught in between all of us, not being white, not being black, but also being an ethnic minority. I actually happened to be taking a class called Human Rights and the Child, and it occurred to me that the Muslim children who are being recruited throughout the Muslim world, specifically in Gaza and also in the West Bank, who are recruited for violent activities, who are used as suicide homicide bombers, who are used as child soldiers and human shields, are being subjected to a human rights violation. The most basic example of hate education is what's happening, for example, to Palestinian Muslim children, has been going on for at least the last 30, 40 years, which is the steady indoctrination through their school textbooks, their television programs, by their religious leaders, their cartoons, often their own parents. They feed them a steady diet of jihad, radical Islamic jihad, and they teach that the greatest thing this child should aspire to, is to blow himself up for the sake of Allah, and he will be rewarded in heaven. But one thing remains the same, that a Jewish person or a Jewish-owned company or a Jewish doctor or student is being treated differently and discriminated against because they're Jewish, because of a protected category. And there's a litany of excuses. I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Israel, I'm just an anti-Zionist, and so on and so forth. We're seeing courts around the world pierce that argument because politics is not an affirmative defense to discrimination.
Brooke Goldstein, welcome to the In HeinzSight BoldCast. Thank you so much for chatting to me.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. You are in South Africa. You've been on a whirlwind trip doing lots of stuff, and you're heading back home soon. If you wouldn't mind, just quickly tell us where is home for you at the moment, and who are you representing, and what have you been up to in South Africa?
Well, first of all, I want to say how amazing it's been to be here. South Africa is an incredible country. It's my first time here. The people are so warm and welcoming, and it's just very refreshing. So I was here on a speaking tour. I was in Johannesburg and Cape Town and talking both to the Jewish and non-Jewish community about issues of civil rights. I am the founder and director of a nonprofit called the Lawfare Project, which is the world's foremost Jewish civil rights litigation fund and public interest law firm. And in that capacity, we financially help and file groundbreaking cases around the world on behalf of Jewish communities. And it was amazing to be here in South Africa because you really do have a long history of impact litigation, getting rid of the segregation and after apartheid, all of the seminal cases that were filed to ensure there's equal protection for all minorities. And I think now in South Africa, we're going through another time where you have to think long and hard, what is the balance between hate speech and free speech? Or do we tolerate hate education? Where do we stand when right now, although we have a history of the blacks, the majority being oppressed, now you have a white minority being oppressed. And of course, the Jews are caught in between all of us, not being white, not being black, but also being an ethnic minority, which is now being targeted by movements like the BDS movement, which is basically commercial discrimination. So here talking about all of these issues with the community and just happy to be here and fascinated and just exhausted too.
I can imagine. I was amazed the other night. I was privileged enough to be at an event where you spoke to a smaller group of people, and the amount of knowledge that you have, and the amount of experience, and the stories that you were just throwing out there, like not even looking at a piece of paper. I was really impressed. It's quite something to experience. But what struck me was your story of how this all started for you. You went to study one thing, and then you had this one course and this one case that really hit home. Can you quickly just share that, where your passion started for this movement that you have begun?
Sure. So, in life, there's always these moments that change the course and the trajectory of your career or your life forever. And I've had a couple of those moments. And the earliest one I had was, when as you mentioned, I was studying in law school to be an entertainment lawyer, but I ended up going into documentary film. And I did so because I stumbled upon the case of Hussam Abdu, who was a 15-year-old physically handicapped, rumored to be mentally handicapped child, Muslim Palestinian child who was caught with live explosives strapped around his waist. He was recruited to be a suicide homicide bomber. And I was a young law student at the time, and I actually happened to be taking a class called Human Rights and the Child. And it occurred to me that the Muslim children who are being recruited throughout the Muslim world, specifically in Gaza and also in the West Bank, who are recruited for violent activities, who are used as suicide homicide bombers, who are used as child soldiers and human shields, are being subjected to a human rights violation, right? Just as child soldiers in Africa are recruited and drugged and put on the front lines and engaged in violence, so too Muslim children are being used by Islamist terrorist groups, and yet nobody is raising the alarm bells. All these groups like Coalition to Stop the Use of Child Soldiers and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International are too busy being politicized and hate Israel so much that they can't even consistently, coherently condemn the use of Muslim children towards violence. Sure. So I ended up doing a film about that. And, the major takeaway of that film is that everything comes down to education. And if you want peace in the Middle East, you got to stop hate education. And if you want to de-radicalize what's happening, for example, on American college campuses, you got to end the hate education, and you got to find what the sources of that indoctrination and radicalization is.
Can you just explain for those who might not know, what do you mean by hate education, and what are the examples that you've seen that have moved you to do what you do?
So the most basic example of hate education is what's happening, for example, to Palestinian Muslim children, has been going on for at least the last 30, if not 40 years, which is the steady indoctrination through their school textbooks, their television programs, by their religious leaders, their cartoons, often their own parents. They feed them a steady diet of jihad, radical Islamic jihad, and they teach that the greatest thing this child should aspire to, is to blow himself up for the sake of Allah, and he will be rewarded in heaven. And when I went to film in Jenin, Ramallah, Tulkam, and Nablus, I interviewed these children firsthand. I went into their schools. I saw their curriculum. We helped financially with a follow-up film that went into UNRWA schools, United Nations Relief Works Agency schools, that literally hire teachers off the Hamas payroll. It is terrorist hate education happening from kindergarten all the way up till they matriculate.
Wow.
And, the whole issue you see recently in the war, the use of hospitals as Hamas headquarters, the use of schools as rocket launching pads and weapons depots. The civilians there are held hostages by Hamas, and the children are educated towards hate. If you want to know what the future of a society looks like, look at what they're teaching their children.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the privilege recently to speak on this podcast to two young ladies. The one is an Israeli lady who was at the Nova Festival on October 7th, who survived the attack. And she said exactly the same thing. I asked her, where does this come from? She says, the Palestinian children are being taught to hate us for no other reason than we are Jewish. And I heard from a Arab Druze young lady who's actually working as a diplomat for her minority group, to say that there's no such thing as apartheid in Israel. That was her own words. And she also spoke about the hate education. It's such a big problem. And I mean, they're going on tours to come against the misinformation and the fake news about Israel. Have you also, I mean, you've got first-hand experience. What would your message be to those who are inclined to believe the legacy and mainstream media that want to make out Israel as the villain only?
Go to Israel, see for yourself. Don't believe the media. You know, it's not our job to convince you to love Israel, frankly. You know, the issue is that there has been a strategic misinformation campaign, and the greatest victims of this misinformation campaign are the Muslims themselves, when we turn a blind eye to how their territories are ruled by terrorist groups. As long as those terrorist groups attack Israel, we give them a pass.
Wow.
We were very proud, Lawfare Project Canada, to be the sponsors, the charitable sponsor of bringing the Nova exhibit to Canada, which documents the scene of a genocide. And what was particularly disturbing is the calls, for example, when the Palestinian Gazans went into the Nova Festival and slaughtered women and raped them and did horrible things, mutilated their bodies, killed whole families, burnt babies alive. The recording of the calls to their parents or to their friends saying, "Oh my God, I killed a Jew. It's so wonderful." And the father congratulating him, "Alhamdulillah, you killed a Jew."
Yeah.
This is a culture of death, and it has to be called out.
Yeah.
And it has to be called out from within. Moderate Muslims have to speak up, and they have to be supported, because, you know, radicalization is a threat both to the society that it radicalizes as well as to the whole world if it spreads. And that's what we're seeing, this so-called globalization of the intifada, where hate education is being exported from the Middle East onto our college campuses, here potentially as well, you know, in South Africa, in colleges that are being radicalized, but a lot in America. Where we have, for example, foreign donations from states like Qatar, the second largest state sponsor of terrorism, the number one financial backer of Hamas, spending billions of dollars on educational programs that they're sponsoring in the United States. The campuses that receive Qatari money have over 300% rise in anti-American, anti-Jewish radicalization and civil rights violations. So this is a tsunami of hate education that's now sweeping the world. And, you know, this great influence campaign, which is only magnified by social media. So we all need to wake up and start pushing against this before it's too late.
And something that you shared the other night as well that really made me think quite a bit is not trying to, like you said earlier, trying to convince people to not do what they're doing, or to rather look at Israel a different way, but to actually start your own form of social justice, I think is the right term, where you started a campaign called End Jew Hatred. Am I correct? That's the right name. You've got the bracelets, and
can't remember if I gave you one.
you did not. I think you ran out, but it's okay.
Okay, good. That's a good sign.
But you've got this movement. Maybe quickly share what it's all about and what you guys stand for and what you're trying to achieve and why you took this route.
Sure. So thank you for asking. So the End Jew Hatred movement was founded about 4 years ago, and it remains to be the only Jewish civil rights movement in modern history. And that was something that was so shocking to me, because the Jewish people have been so instrumental and hugely part of other civil rights and minority rights and human rights movements around the world, from the Black civil rights movements of the 1950s to the anti-apartheid movement here. There's a deep, deep partnership between the Jewish community and minority rights movements. You know, Jews for Black Lives Mattering, Jews for, you know, gay rights, Jews for women's rights. We're in everything. And yet there has never been a Jews for Jewish rights movement. And instead, what's happened is that the Jewish community has been, you know, strategically divided on political partisan lines. And our entire focus of advocacy also is defensive and called pro-Israel, right? If you want to be a Jewish civil rights advocate, you're told, well, you have to defend a foreign state. You have to memorize a 15-page pamphlet of why Israel isn't an apartheid state. You have to basically get a law degree, every, UN resolution.
Sure.
And I realized that this really is not the solution. Jewish people have every right to live outside of Israel and also exercise their civil rights and are deserved of equal protection. And what we see happening is the projection of the hatred of a foreign government on somebody here because they're Jewish. So I hate Israel, therefore I can discriminate against you because you're Jewish. And you have a perfect example of that actually with Cape Union Mart, where you have radical Islamists who are misinformed, projecting their hatred of a foreign government on a company and the Jewish owner of that company because they are bigoted. And, there's no connection between Israel and Cape Union Mart. Is completely different, and yet the guise of political activism, and they wrap themselves in the shroud of human rights language, justifies standing outside and advocating for the boycott of a store that's in a discriminatory fashion because somebody is Jewish. That is what's going on. And human rights and politics are being used as an excuse. And so the movement, End Jew Hatred movement, really says enough is enough. We are the oldest, most persecuted minority community in human history, and we deserve equal protection under the law. And we mobilize Jewish communities around the world to advocate for themselves. We provide them with strategic support, with funding, with pro bono legal support to really mobilize. And the reason why I've had such an incredible, enlightening trip here in South Africa, because I came thinking maybe perhaps there's something I could bring, and teach the community here. But as it happens, I'm leaving with the opposite conclusion. I think that, the American Jewish community has a lot to learn from the South African Jewish community, the South African Afrikaans community, and also the Black Christian Zionist community here with the history of mobilization and impact litigation. We need you guys more than you need us. And the rich history of mobilization here in South Africa is very refreshing. So I hope to continue to learn from you to influence the End Jew Hatred movement as well.
Come on, that's powerful. When you look back one day, before you close your eyes in this life, what would you want to be able to say or have others say about the imprint that you made on this world?
So there's two lessons I guess I would leave to my children, let's say. The first would be carpe diem, seize the day, seize the opportunities. It's less, what do you want to be when you grow up, and more, what are you doing with the opportunities that are presented to you right now, and how best can you use your skills to make your values a reality? And the second, equally important, is there's nothing to fear but fear itself. I've learned when the Jewish community unifies and stands up for itself, miracles can happen. But when we're divided, we're like sheep to the slaughter. And the other thing is that I had so many people in my career tell me, no, don't do it, shut still, be quiet, you're too aggressive, you're ruffling feathers, or you can't say that, it's Islamophobic, or it's racist, when in reality what you're calling out is racism and human rights violations and all of the intimidation. If you don't have a gun to your head, there's nothing to be afraid of speaking the truth.
Come on.
And so those are the two things that I would leave as lessons.
What is it that defines your values for yourself? You say you're fighting for values, standing up for what's right. What is driving you? And if you can maybe link it to your profound answer about why are the Jews so hated by the rest of the world? Because I think it links up. I might be wrong, but I think it will link up.
I think it does. I mean, so my values as a Jewish person are Torah values. I believe in the 10 Commandments. I believe in justice and the pursuit of justice. And that is what I have dedicated myself to. And I saw an incredible movie called Tragic Awakening, which asked the question, why do people hate Jews? What is the root cause of anti-Semitism? And I learned that according to the Torah, that Hate came into the world when the Torah was given. Mount Sinai, Sinai and Sinat is the same root. So the same time that law and order and justice came, so came hatred. And the reason why the Jews are so hated, if you look at who are the parties that hate Jews, those that are despots, that are dictatorships, those who want to murder and to steal and to engage in human rights violations, those are the entities that want to kill Jews. Because the Jews stand for Torah law and justice. And what we brought to the world when we brought monotheism is a sense of responsibility, right? That you don't need an intermediary, you don't need a king or a priest to talk and be with God, that God sees everything that you're doing. And when you got rid of polytheism, for example, there's no one to blame but yourself for your actions and the repercussions and consequences of that. So in polytheism, when you believe in multiple gods, if something bad happened to you, instead of worshiping the sun god, okay, you got to worship the moon god now. But with monotheism, we said, no, it's personal responsibility. Things that happen to you are a result of how moral and what you do in this world. So when you have a sense of justice and those that hate you for it, it's less about studying anti-Semitism as, black and white pictures of concentration camp survivors, and it's more about understanding really the beauty of Torah law and how it is inevitable that if you want to bring light into the world, you're going to have to also battle darkness and hatred.
Yeah, if, I would put it slightly, if I can add to that, for the sense that I have is that there's a creator who made the world, and he set things in motion for how it's supposed to work, and he told us how it's supposed to work through like you said, the 10 Commandments. And a creator will ask accountability of his creation, and so we have something to live for, and it's actually not a burden; it's a blessing, and it's powerful how you live it out, and how you're an example of that. So thank you for that. If I may ask, if you would have a message, I'm a white Afrikaans guy living in South Africa. I'm a Christian. And I'm trying to, make a difference in the space that I have. What would your message be, having been here from the space that you come and the work that you do? What would your message / encouragement, maybe a little slap of the wrist, be to the communities in our country that are minorities, the Afrikaner, that sees themselves as, I've got similar values. I'm not sure what to do, because some are fleeing out of fear, some are staying to try and make the best of it. How should we navigate this system we're in, the time that we're in? What would your advice be for us?
I think that you're blessed that you live in a democracy and you have a wonderful constitution, and you have groups, for example, like AfriForum, who are setting precedents in the law, doing things like citizen prosecution and bringing cases to ensure that you don't replace discrimination with more discrimination. And minority rights issues really affect everyone, and it's not just the Jews need to fight for Jewish civil rights, or the whites need to fight for whites and the black. It's all intertwined, because that's how the law works. And so, I also think that there's great opportunity for partnership, setting precedents around the world based on, the same circumstances. There are questions being asked of courts around the world that are similar. In the United States and Canada, we're setting precedents that, anti-Zionist discrimination is anti-Jewish discrimination. So every case that I bring has a different plaintiff. Every case has a different fact pattern. But one thing remains the same, that a Jewish person or a Jewish-owned company or a Jewish doctor or student is being treated differently and discriminated against because they're Jewish, because of a protected category. And there's a litany of excuses. I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Israel, I'm just an anti-Zionist, and so on and so forth. And we're seeing courts around the world pierce that argument, because politics is not an affirmative defense to discrimination, right? So if I hate China because of the way it handled COVID. I can't turn around to a local Chinese American student and discriminate against him and exclude him from school-funded activities. So why is it perfectly okay if you claim to hate Israel or you're advocating Israel-Palestine to turn around and treat a local Jewish person differently?
Sure.
That's not okay.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's important, and here you have state capture and you have your own unique issues. You have the expropriation of property without compensation. We have a long history of case law in the United States about, how the government does have to compensate and why that's a basic human and civil right. And so I think scholars need to start communicating. It's a globalized world. We can't be on one end creating legal precedent without communicating and helping and strategizing on the other end of the world, because we're a global community, and we have opportunities right now that we have to explore together.
That's good. Do you think there's reason for hope? And do you think the fight will be won for what you are standing up for?
Hope always. Always hope. I've seen miracles in my life.
Awesome.
We're witnessing miracles. The last 2 years has been remarkable. The world within the last 8 days looks completely different. Hope all the time. Absolutely.
I know I have to let you go. I'd love to chat for quite some time more with you, but maybe as a last thing, could you tell us one of the miracle stories that you've seen where someone was in a really unfair position, you guys were able to come in and help, and there was a good outcome? Can you maybe share one story like that with us?
Well, there's so many. I just want to also say just the miracles that we've seen on the world stage.
Yeah.
The survival of President Donald Trump from assassination attempts twice.
Wow. Yeah.
The removal of the IRGC, the state's largest state sponsor of terror. The fact that Hezbollah was crippled and couldn't join in after October the 7th. There's just so many. And then on my micro level, I've seen Jewish communities mobilize, get on the steps, of a courthouse, 200, 300 people demand justice. I've seen them influence the closing of stores that have had anti-Semitic material. I've seen the activists get professors fired who are full of Jew hatred and indoctrination or radicalization. When the Jewish community works together and unifies and really follows the example of the South African community that have a long tradition of getting out on the street and protesting lawfully, peacefully. When the people speak and organize, that's when you see change. You just have to have the courage to get out on the street and do it with a single focused message.
May I ask you two more questions? So just based on what you said now, so number one, I'm glad you said what you said about the big changes we've seen. I think if there's anyone that's gotten an unfair amount of negative press and not enough positive press, it is Donald Trump. And I'm not saying that I agree with every single thing he does and says, but we have to admit that there's been a huge change in the world because of what he and his team does stand for. Would you agree with that statement?
100%. I think that he is probably one of the best presidents in recent U.S. history. It's just absolutely historic. The IRGC possessing a nuclear weapon is just unthinkable, and no president has had the courage to get in there and do what needed to be done for the world, not just for America. He issued executive orders. The Jewish community should be particularly thankful for him for issuing the executive order that expands Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to protect Jewish students on campus. We should be thankful to him for his order declaring that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. We should be thankful for him on day one to saying man are man and women are women, just to have the truth, to have the courage to speak the truth, unfortunately, is a rare value when it comes to politicians. And that's why Donald Trump is not a politician. He's an American. He's a businessman. He's a deal maker. And he's a practical realist. And he has enormous amount of courage. And he's a man of faith. Yeah. And, we're very blessed to be living in the second Trump term, I'd say.
Come on, I agree. And the last question, I think you're so right about the power of unity And I think it's something we lack in our different identities. But where you've seen that happen, where you've seen people unify and are able to do things that no one thought was possible. Can you maybe summarize that thing? What is that thing that does unite? And so that it can also be a piece of advice for how do we unite around good causes and to bring about good results? How would the Jewish community in South Africa unite? How would everyone who stands up for the same things unite? Yeah.
So it just falls down to basic truths, right? You have to unite around a basic truth.
Okay.
So for my film, right, there's a lot of division over the so-called Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but I was able to unite around a basic truth. Muslim children are innocent. They don't deserve to have a bomb strapped around them and to have their limbs blown to pieces.
I hear you.
If we can agree with that, I did a debate with Hamid Dabashi, who is a Edward Said protege, pretty radical professor at Columbia University, with Alan Dershowitz when the film first came out. And, Professor Dabashi, I said, do you think Muslim children are innocent? Do you think they deserve to die? And he said, well, absolutely not. And I said, well, is it okay then to have a Muslim child suicide homicide bomber? And he said, no. I said, well, then is it okay to teach a Muslim child to kill him or herself with hate education? No. Is it okay to fund that education then? No. So my political opponent ended up agreeing with me that there's no justification for what was going on. And on the cover of my DV is a quote from Alan Dershowitz and a quote from Hamid Dabashi. Because you have to start from a basic, truthful premise. So the premise, for example, of the End Jew Hatred movement, we don't take stances on foreign politics. It's about ending Jew hatred.
Yeah.
If you believe in ending hatred against blacks or ending hatred against Muslims or ending hatred against women, then or whites, so too must you believe in ending hatred against Jews, or you're the bigot, right? When we describe ourselves as pro-Israel, what we do is we set up an immediate binary. If I'm pro-Israel, I recognize, there's also pro-Palestinian or anti-Israel, and there's two sides to the story. There's my truth, there's your truth, and if I'm an objective person, I need to hear both sides and come out somewhere in between. I think that's a weak narrative, right? We're talking here not about politics. We're talking about age-old discrimination. It used to be against Jews because we're communist, or as Jews because we're capitalist, or Jews because we're rich, or Jews because we're poor. And now we have Israel, which is the Jew of all the states, right? So we have to focus on the simple truths. People are innocent. They don't deserve to be used as human shields in the Gaza context. And when you indiscriminately fire against citizens, that's a war crime. If free societies can't agree on these basic truths of what's right and wrong and what's moral and what's not, then there's a sickness in the society itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Brooke, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everything that you do. That's literally changing lives around the world. And as much as I hear your humility and saying you've learned a lot from us, I'm sure you've deposited so much into our nation. May God bless you, your family, and what you do. And we hope to see you back here someday soon.
Thank you for the kind words. And it was really my pleasure to meet you. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you so much. Goodbye.